The Andorian Institute for Xenological Studies had hosted many distinguished lectures, but none quite like Professor Zek Thul's presentation on human mythological parallels in deep space exploration. The auditorium buzzed with the kind of intellectual excitement that only emerged when academics believed they'd stumbled onto something revolutionary. 300 of the galaxy's finest xenological minds had gathered to witness what promised to be a paradigm shift in their understanding of primitive human folklore. Professor Zek Thul, a distinguished Vorthan with the characteristic silver-scaled complexion of his species, adjusted his translation collar and gestured toward the holographic display. Colleagues, what I present today will fundamentally alter our perception of human mythological development. Through extensive analysis of their cultural databases, we have discovered that human legends contain startlingly accurate descriptions of actual galactic phenomena. In the back row, tucked between two eager graduate students, a middle-aged human woman named Commander Reese Chen, though she hadn't used that title in 15 years, sipped her coffee and tried not to laugh. The irony was delicious, really. Here was an entire auditorium of brilliant minds dissecting stories they believed to be ancient human fantasies, when in reality they were reading excerpts from classified mission reports she'd written herself. Consider this passage from their mythological corpus, Zek Thul continued, his voice carrying the pompous certainty of someone who'd never been wrong about anything important. The hero ventures into the void beyond stars, where time flows backward and space folds upon itself like origami made of darkness. There she encounters the singing crystals that hold the memories of dead civilizations. Reese nearly choked on her coffee. That wasn't mythology. That was her mission report from the Kepler 442 expedition, circa 2387. She'd spent 3 months in that temporal anomaly zone, and the singing crystals were actually crystallized data storage units left behind by the extinct Morvaki civilization. The poetic language had been her attempt to make the technical briefing more palatable for the bureaucrats back on Earth. Remarkable, isn't it? Zek Thul beamed at his audience. The precision of details suggests either remarkable coincidence or some form of species-wide precognitive ability. Note how the human myth describes the crystals as singing in frequencies that bypass the ear and speak directly to the soul. This is an astoundingly accurate description of Morvaki memory crystal resonance pattern. Dr. Keth Mora, a Centaurian xenopsychologist in the third row, raised a tentacle. Professor, have you considered the possibility that these aren't myths at all? The technical accuracy seems beyond what a primitive species should possess. Zek Thul's scales shifted to a deeper silver, the Vorthan equivalent of a condescending smile. My dear colleague, humans barely achieved interstellar travel 50 years ago. They lack the technological sophistication for such expeditions. These are clearly mythological constructs, possibly inspired by primitive radio telescope observations or fevered dreams of their science fiction writers. Reese had to bite her lip to keep from correcting him. Humans had been conducting deep space operations for over a century, but they'd gotten rather good at making sure nobody noticed. The official first contact timeline was convenient fiction, designed to keep curious galactic neighbors from paying too much attention to human activities. Let me share another fascinating example, Zek Thul continued, manipulating the hologram to display a new text passage. From their collection of tall tales, we find this account. The phantom ship traverses the spaces between spaces, crewed by those who died but forgot to stop working. They appear when civilizations teeter on the brink of extinction, offering salvation to those who accept their price. The professor's audience murmured appreciatively, but Reese felt her amusement drain away. That wasn't one of her reports. That was from the Lazarus Division, the deep, black operations unit that handled civilizational crisis intervention. Very few people knew about Lazarus, and even fewer knew their methods were considered questionable by every ethical standard in known space. The anthropological implications are staggering. Zekthul pressed on, oblivious to the fact that he'd just described an active human military unit to a room full of potential intelligence assets. This phantom ship mythology appears in human cultures across multiple continents and historical periods. It suggests a deep psychological archetype related to their species' apparent obsession with martyrdom and sacrifice. Dr. Veltara, a hegemony researcher known for her work on interspecies psychology, leaned forward in her seat. "Professor, I've studied human behavioral patterns extensively. Their mythology often contains surprisingly sophisticated understanding of quantum mechanics and multidimensional physics. Are we certain these are primitive stories?" "Absolutely certain," Zekthul replied with the confidence of someone who'd never had his certainty challenged by uncomfortable facts. Humans possess an intuitive grasp of certain concepts, but they lack the mathematical framework to truly understand them. They express complex ideas through metaphor and symbolism because they cannot process them rationally. Reese stood up slowly, her movement causing a ripple of attention through the auditorium. "Excuse me, Professor." Zekthul paused, his silver scales shifting to a slightly annoyed shade. "Yes? Do you have a question about the research methodology?" "Actually, I have a correction." Reese's voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made people listen without quite understanding why. "That passage you just quoted about the phantom ship? You're missing context. The full report includes technical specifications for their vessels, crew rotation schedules, and a detailed breakdown of their operational parameters." The auditorium fell silent. Zekthul's scales were shifting through several colors now, none of them particularly flattering. "I'm sorry, but these are mythological texts. There are no technical specifications in human folklore." Bree smiled, and something about that expression made several of the more perceptive audience members suddenly very uncomfortable. "Professor, you're quoting my mission logs, all of them, and you're getting the details wrong." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes either revelation or catastrophe. Sometimes, if you're particularly unlucky, both. Zekthul's scales had settled into a pale, confused silver. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" "The singing crystals of Kepler 442, the phantom ship incident near the Veil Nebula, the time dilation rescue in the Andromeda Gap." Reese's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "Those aren't myths, Professor. They're classified operation reports from the Human Deep Space Initiative. I should know. I wrote most of them." She took a sip of her coffee and regarded the stunned faces around her with the patience of someone who'd had this conversation before, though never quite in these circumstances. "The real question is, how did classified human military intelligence end up in your mythology database?" The auditorium erupted into chaos. 300 xenological minds simultaneously attempted to process information that violated everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. Dr. Kefmora's tentacles writhed in agitation, while Dr. Veltara's facial chromatophores cycled through rapid patterns of disbelief. "Preposterous!" Zekthul's scales had shifted to an angry bronze. "Madam, I don't know what game you're playing, but these texts were retrieved from publicly accessible human cultural archives. They predate your species' supposed interstellar capabilities by centuries." Reese walked down the aisle with the unhurried pace of someone who'd faced down worse than academic skepticism. Behind her, she could hear whispered conversations in a dozen languages, most of them variations on "could she be telling the truth" and "how would we even verify this?" "Dr. Yithkan," she called to a hegemony archivist in the fourth row, "you specialize in cultural transmission patterns, correct? Tell me, when you analyzed the provenance of these texts, did you notice anything unusual about their distribution vectors?" The insectoid researcher's compound eyes focused on her with uncomfortable intensity. The texts appeared simultaneously across multiple human information networks approximately 43 standard years ago. The synchronicity was anomalous. 43 years ago, Rees nodded approvingly. That would be when the human colonial administration declassified the first wave of sanitized reports for academic study. They scrubbed the technical data and released them as speculative fiction to gauge galactic intelligence interest in human activities. Professor Zekthul sputtered, his translation collar struggling to keep up with his rapid-fire objections. "Even if your claims were true, which they aren't, you're suggesting a massive conspiracy involving multiple galactic civilizations. The mathematical improbability alone—" "Professor," interrupted Dr. Memphisis, a quantum mathematician from the Spiral Collective, "the statistical anomalies in human mythology have been documented. The precision of their fictional descriptions of exotic matter states exceeds random chance by factors approaching infinity." Rees reached the front of the auditorium and turned to face her audience. "The Helix Station incident that you've catalogued as the tower that touched tomorrow, Dr. Veltara, you published a paper analyzing its psychological symbolism, didn't you?" The hegemony researcher's chromatophores flickered nervously. The mythological structure suggested deep species trauma related to temporal displacement and causality violations. The symbolic language was remarkably sophisticated for a pre-spaceflight civilization. "It wasn't symbolic." Rees's voice carried the flat certainty of someone recounting facts rather than stories. "Helix Station was a temporal research facility that got caught in a causality loop. 17 researchers were trapped, experiencing the same 47 minutes for subjective decades, before we managed to collapse the temporal anomaly. The tower that touched tomorrow description came from Lieutenant Morrison's psychological evaluation report after extraction." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Dr. Kethmora's tentacles had stopped writhing and hung motionless, a sign of deep concentration among his species. "You're asking us to believe," Zektul said slowly, "that humans have been conducting advanced spacefaring operations for over a century, while maintaining the pretense of being newcomers to interstellar civilization?" "I'm not asking you to believe anything," Rees replied. "I'm telling you what happened. The Terran Council decided early on that making a dramatic entrance onto the galactic stage would create more problems than it solved. Better to let everyone think we're harmless newcomers while we figure out how this whole galactic community thing works." Dr. Yithkan's mandibles clicked in what Rees recognized as the hegemony equivalent of nervous laughter. "The implications are staggering. If humans have been operating undetected for decades, what else don't we know about your capabilities?" "Quite a lot, actually." Rees gestured toward the holographic display still showing Zektul's presentation slides. "That passage about the Shepherds of the Void that you've interpreted as humanity's death wish mythology, those are the Aegis Fleet, deep space patrol units that maintain early warning networks around unstable systems. They've prevented approximately 47 civilizational extinction events in the past 60 years. The auditorium buzzed with alarmed conversation. Several researchers were frantically accessing their personal databases, cross-referencing human mythological texts with historical records of mysterious interventions in galactic crisis situations. Professor Zekthul had recovered enough composure to mount a final challenge. Even if we accept your extraordinary claims, you have no way to prove them. These could be elaborate fabrications designed to enhance human prestige. Reese smiled, and this time several audience members actually recoiled from the expression. Professor, you've been studying human psychology for decades. Tell me, what's the one thing humans are absolutely incapable of doing when it comes to their achievements? What do you mean? Still staying humble about them. She pulled out a small device that most of the audience assumed was a primitive human communication tool. Would operational footage from the Kepler 442 expedition constitute sufficient proof? Dr. Veltara leaned forward eagerly. You have recordings? Every mission is documented. Standard protocol. Reese's thumb hovered over the device's activation control. Though I should warn you, once you see this, several of your governments will probably want to have very long conversations with you about information security. The weight of that statement settled over the auditorium like a blanket of uncomfortable realization. They were no longer dealing with academic curiosity. They were potentially accessing classified intelligence that could reshape galactic politics. Zekthul's scales had faded to an uncertain gray. You're serious. You actually have proof. Professor, Reese said gently, I've been attending your lectures for 3 years. Do you really think I'd wait until now to make something up? Reese activated the device, and the auditorium's holographic projectors came online with the seamless efficiency of technology far more advanced than anything the Institute normally used. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was about to reveal classified human operations using human-desumed equipment that had been quietly integrated into alien infrastructure for decades. The first image materialized above the audience. A vast crystalline structure suspended in the twisted space-time of a temporal anomaly. The crystals pulsed with internal light, and even through the recording's audio filters, their harmonic resonance created an almost hypnotic effect. Mission log, Kepler 442 expedition, day 73. Her own voice echoed through the auditorium, younger but unmistakably hers. The Morvaki memory crystals are responding to human neural patterns in ways our xenobiologists didn't predict. Lieutenant Chen reporting successful interface with data structure 7 alpha. Translation protocols are adequate. Dr. Memphis nearly fell from her perch. Those temporal distortion readings, the mathematics alone should have torn apart any vessel attempting approach. Human engineering tends to be more robust than our specifications suggest, Reese replied, manipulating the display to show technical readouts that made several physicists in the audience visibly pale. We've found that building things to survive the impossible makes them quite reliable for merely improbable situations. The recording shifted, showing her younger self in an environmental suit, standing before a crystal formation that dwarfed the Institute's entire building. The suit's readings displayed atmospheric conditions that should have been instantly lethal. The Morvaki stored their consciousness in quantum superposition matrices. Her recorded voice continued. Each crystal contains approximately 40,000 individual mind states, preserved in temporal stasis for roughly 2 million years. They're not exactly alive, but they're not exactly dead either. They're concerned. Professor Zekthul had gone completely silent, his scales cycling through colors that suggested his worldview was undergoing rapid reconstruction. The technical precision of those readings, the quantum resonance calculations. How did you survive exposure to superposition matrices of that magnitude? Carefully, Reese answered, advancing the recording to show her team's extraction from the anomaly zone. Though I'll admit, the whole experience was profoundly unsettling. The Morvaki kept apologizing for their civilization's extinction, Apparently, they considered it poor hospitality. Dr. Veltara's chromatophores had locked into a pattern of intense fascination. The psychological implications of sustained contact with preserved consciousness matrices. How did your team maintain sanity? Bold of you to assume we did. Reese's dry humor didn't quite mask the genuine shadows that crossed her expression. Dr. Patterson spent 6 months convinced he could hear whispered conversations in languages that had been dead since before Earth developed multicellular life. Commander Hayes developed a compulsive habit of apologizing to empty rooms. I started writing mission reports that read like poetry because conventional technical language felt inadequate. She switched to another recording, this one showing a sleek vessel that seemed to bend light around its hull, making it difficult to focus on directly. The timestamp indicated it was recorded in deep space, far from any known star system. Lazarus Division operational footage, Reese announced, her tone becoming noticeably more formal. I wasn't part of this unit, but their mission reports occasionally crossed my desk for strategic analysis. The vessel in the recording approached what appeared to be empty space, but as it drew closer, the distortion fields revealed a massive structure, a space station in the final stages of catastrophic system failure. The readings showed radiation levels that should have sterilized everything within several light years. The Zektai colony in the outer spiral, Dr. Yithkan whispered, his compound eyes reflecting the recording's emergency lighting. They suffered total biosphere collapse 3 years ago. We sent survey teams but found no survivors. You found no survivors because Lazarus got there first, Reese confirmed. 17,000 colonists extracted in 43 hours, relocated to a prepared habitat in the Centauri secondary systems. The official record shows catastrophic failure with no survivors because that's what the Zektai government requested. Easier to mourn the dead than explain how aliens nobody knew existed managed a rescue operation their own military couldn't. The recording showed figures in environmental suits moving through the dying station with practiced efficiency. Their equipment was clearly human-designed, but incorporated technologies that shouldn't have existed, according to official galactic technological assessments. Dr. Kethmura's tentacles twitched in recognition patterns. The energy signature traces we found in the wreckage. We attributed them to exotic matter decay from the station's reactor failure. Actually, those were residual signatures from our temporal displacement fields, Reese corrected. Lazarus uses localized time dilation to extend operational windows during crisis extraction. 24 hours real-time becomes subjectively much longer for the rescue teams. She manipulated the controls again, and the display shifted to show a new recording, this one from her personal archives, showing a younger version of herself in a command center that buzzed with activity. Dozens of screens showed star charts, fleet positions, and what appeared to be real-time monitoring of multiple civilizations across the galaxy. Strategic Operations Center, Human Deep Space Initiative, her recorded voice announced. Mission brief for Kepler 442 expedition. Investigate Movaki ruins for potential civilization-level threats. Secondary objective, assess temporal anomaly for possible defensive applications. Tertiary objective, determine if crystallized consciousness preservation represents viable emergency protocol for endangered species. The implications hit the audience like a physical wave. They were looking at evidence of human intelligence operations that spanned decades and monitored civilizations across known space. You've been watching us, Dr. Veltara said, her chromatophores shifting to patterns that indicated profound unease. All of us, for how long? Since before most of your species achieved interstellar flight, Rees replied matter-of-factly. The Terran Council's official policy is preventive assistance. We identify potential catastrophic scenarios and intervene quietly to prevent them. Sometimes that means evacuating colonies before their stars go nova. Sometimes it means leaving strategic technological advances where curious researchers will find them. Sometimes it means attending xenological conferences to make sure the academic community doesn't stumble onto information that might cause diplomatic incidents. Professor Zekthul finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. How many interventions? How many times have you helped? In the past century, Reese accessed her device's database with casual familiarity. 4,317 direct interventions, approximately 12,000 indirect ones, 7 complete civilizational relocations, 41 prevented wars, 6 prevented genocides, and 1 really awkward incident with a species that was accidentally worshipping a malfunctioning human probe as a deity. The auditorium had fallen into the kind of silence that precedes either enlightenment or existential crisis. The question you should be asking, Reese continued, isn't how long we've been watching, it's what we've been watching for. The weight of that statement settled over the auditorium like gravity suddenly doubling. Dr. Memphis was the first to break the silence, her mathematical mind immediately leaping to the most uncomfortable conclusion. "You're monitoring for existential threats?" she said, her voice carrying the hollow tone of someone who'd just realized they'd been living in a carefully maintained illusion of safety. "Something that could threaten the entire galactic community?" Reese nodded approvingly. The Spiral Collective always did produce the sharpest analytical minds. "Yes, Dr. Mentis. We're watching for what our strategic planners call cascade scenarios. Events that could trigger galactic-scale civilizational collapse." She manipulated her device again, and the display showed a 3-dimensional map of known space, with pulsing indicators scattered throughout, like a constellation of potential disasters. Each indicator was color-coded, and there were far more red ones than anyone in the audience felt comfortable seeing. The hegemony's expansion into the void sectors triggered early warnings 18 months ago, Reese explained, highlighting a cluster of red indicators near hegemony space. "Your exploration fleets have been approaching the boundaries of something that doesn't want to be found. We've been quietly redirecting your survey missions to safer regions. Dr. Yithkan's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. "The navigation anomalies our fleets reported. The unexplained course corrections. Human intervention," Reese confirmed. "Subtle gravitational manipulation using portable singularity generators. Your ship's sensors interpreted the course changes as natural phenomena because the alternative would have required acknowledging technology that officially doesn't exist." Professor Zekthul had been silent for several minutes, his scales cycling through increasingly pale shades as he processed the implications. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of its earlier academic confidence. "If you've been preventing disasters for decades, why reveal yourselves now? Why break your policy of anonymity?" Ree's expression grew serious for the first time since the presentation began. "Because the cascade scenarios are accelerating beyond our ability to manage discreetly. The Andromeda signal incident 3 months ago wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was a probe testing our response capabilities. Something out there knows we exist, and it's getting curious." The holographic display shifted to show sensor readings from the edge of galactic space, where reality seemed to bend and twist in ways that made several physicists in the audience visibly nauseous. "The entity responsible has been dormant for approximately 60 million years, Reese continued. "Our xenoarchaeological teams believe it's responsible for at least 3 previous galactic mass extinction events. The Morvaki crystals contained warnings about it. That's why they preserved their consciousness. They were trying to leave a message for whoever came after. Dr. Veltara's chromatophores had locked into patterns of pure terror. You're saying there's something out there that could destroy every civilization in the galaxy? Not could, Reese corrected quietly. Will, unless we work together to prevent it. The discrete intervention model only works when the threats are isolated and manageable. This isn't. She paused the recording and turned to face her audience directly. The Terran Council has authorized full disclosure to the academic community because you're the ones who will need to convince your governments that cooperation with a species they thought was primitive might be the only thing standing between them and extinction. The silence that followed was broken by Dr. Kethmora's tentacles, writhing in what Reese recognized as deep thought patterns. The psychological profiles your species maintains on all of us. You've been preparing for this moment. For 30 years, Reese acknowledged. We've been identifying individuals in positions of influence who could handle the truth and help facilitate the transition to open cooperation. Professor Zekthul's mythology lectures were particularly useful. Anyone attending them was already intellectually flexible enough to consider unconventional possibilities. Zekthul's scales shifted to an almost transparent silver, the Vorthan equivalent of complete bewilderment. You've been manipulating us, guiding our research. Everything we thought we discovered independently was breadcrumbs we left for you to find, Reese confirmed without apologizing. The alternative was letting you stumble around in ignorance until something killed you all. We prefer the breadcrumb approach. She gestured toward the still active holographic display, where the Cascade scenario map continued to pulse ominously. The entity in the void sectors will fully awaken within 18 standard months. When it does, it will begin converting matter and energy in this galaxy into something else. Something that organic life cannot survive in. The Morvaki calculations suggest we have approximately 7 years before the process becomes irreversible. Dr. Mimthis had been furiously calculating on her personal device. The energy requirements for galaxy-scale matter conversion, the mathematics are staggering. How do you fight something with that level of capability? Very carefully, and with the combined resources of every spacefaring civilization, Reese replied. Humans are good at impossible situations, but we're not miracle workers. We need the hegemony's industrial capacity, the Spiral Collective's computational resources, Vorthan expertise in exotic matter manipulation, and about a dozen other specialized capabilities that only exist within your various civilizations. Professor Zekthul had recovered enough composure to ask the obvious question, and in exchange for this cooperation, what do humans gain? Reese smiled, and for the first time that evening, the expression held genuine warmth rather than ironic amusement. The same thing you do, Professor. We get to continue existing in a universe where organic life is possible. She deactivated the holographic display and tucked her device away. The Terran Council has prepared comprehensive briefing materials for your respective governments. Dr. Veltara, your expertise in interspecies psychology will be particularly valuable in helping various political entities process this information without descending into panic. As she walked back up the aisle toward the exit, Reese paused next to Professor Zekthul's podium. Oh, and Professor, your lecture series on human mythology, the Terran Council would like to offer you a consulting position. It turns out we need someone who's good at explaining our actual capabilities without making them sound quite so terrifying. She reached the auditorium doors and turned back for one final observation. The biggest myth about humans isn't that we're primitive newcomers to galactic civilization. It's that we're reckless and unpredictable. In reality, we're methodical planners who've spent the last century preparing for exactly this conversation. The doors closed behind her with a soft pneumatic hiss, leaving 300 of the galaxy's finest minds to contemplate the uncomfortable realization that their entire understanding of cosmic politics had just been turned inside out. And somewhere in the void sectors, something ancient and patient registered the subtle shift in galactic electromagnetic patterns that indicated a species had finally decided to stop pretending to be harmless. The universe held its breath.